Here. There we go. Recording in progress. Fantastic. We got everybody here. Frank, we can get you front and center, man. Keith said he wanted you over here in the dead center for everything. So we will let everybody get logged in and settled. Got a lot of folks jumping in. So pumped to have everybody here. Ollie, when you were asking where is everybody located, I'll ask the double down question because I'm looking out this window right now and it's pouring rain here in Atlanta. So we're finally getting some weather break. I don't know, how's the New York scene looking right now? Are we staying dry or is it wet up there too?
Nothing but sunshine, Brad. Sorry to rub it in.
Yeah, relatively good today.
Oh gosh, man. See, that's what I need. I need to have, maybe up in New York more. That's the only thing that, or in Austin with you, Taft. I'm sure it's probably better weather up there than it is, or over there than it is here.
Yeah, sorry to tell you, it's pretty awesome.
Well, thanks, guys. Just keep rubbing it in. Sometime it's been raining for like 4 days, Sarah, something like that. Yeah. It's been crazy. So, well, cool. We got a lot of folks in, and I love all the chatter. Keep it coming, guys. Keep chatting with us and be active. But welcome to Shops Talk. God, episode 20, which is kind of wild to think about. We're gonna take a lot of trips down memory lane during this episode. But love seeing some of the folks. Grossberg's on here hanging out, who we've had before on Shops Talk. So Nick too. Excited for not only this episode, we're excited about every episode, but this one in particular, we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of doing these things, which is kind of crazy. Done 20 of them so far, so almost every other week. And the one thing that we wanted to do today, especially, was we're going to rewind the clock a little bit. We're always going to look back at what the last year has taught us from a revenue operations perspective and just ops in general. But we're also going to look forward. So what we've done here, we've got a rock star crew who's all going to introduce themselves here shortly. But we got two folks that have been on Shops Talk before. So we have Monis and Keith, who have been with us over the last year, and especially been huge community members at WizOps. But we also got two folks that haven't been on Shops Talk yet with Taft and Ollie. So we're going to do a lot of retrospecting of what the last year looked like, but really where are we going now as we wrap up 2021, but also we're rolling into 2022 as we speak. I know everybody here on this call, when we were catching up a second ago, is going through planning right now, which the whole world of operations is going through planning in October, like we all do for next year. But that being said, we're going to go around the room and at least let our wonderful folks get to introduce themselves. Before we do that, though, I always say thank you to our partners over at Salesforce. Again, we're coming up on this 1 year anniversary of doing this Shops Talk episode, and can't thank Jen and her team over at Salesforce so much for even coming up with the idea. They're the ones that are like, hey, let's put a bunch of smart people in a room and have good conversations. And a year later, here we are. But excited to have them as a sponsor, obviously. Excited for the folks we have on this call. So Taft, I'm going to kick it over to you, let you introduce yourself, and we'll keep going down the road. But Taft, take it away.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. My name's Taft Love. I'm two things. I'm the VP of Sales for DocSend, a small SaaS startup that was recently acquired by Dropbox. I'm also the co-founder of Iceberg Revenue Operations, so a small sort of boutique consulting firm that does RevOps, both consulting and wrench work for scaling companies. And a little bit about me: I'm started out in law enforcement, was a street cop and a detective and a federal agent, and then moved on from that, lived overseas for a few years, and fell sort of ass backwards into sales when I moved to California, where my family had moved when I was overseas, and have sort of stumbled into ops years ago and figured out I liked it, and have stayed here. And that brings us to today, getting to be on Shops Talk for the first time.
Fantastic. Taft, love having you here. Obviously, Scotch just jumped in here too, our other office dog. So if you see a tail wagging, you'll say it's Scotch. But fantastic, Monis. We've obviously had you on before, but I'll let you reintroduce yourself for folks who haven't had a chance to meet you.
Sure, man. Hello to everyone. It's amazing to be back on Shops Talk. I've been admiring how much better and better the episodes have gotten and the caliber of the guests. It's so cool to be back and honored to be on a panel with all these gents. I'm a former high school math teacher who decided to survive a few years as a BDR, and then decided again that, hey, yeah, that's not for me either, and realized that operations was the right fit. I spent some time in operations at a company called CB Insights, doing emerging tech research, and then found my way into a space I'm really passionate about in mental health, and I'm now leading the operations team at Spring Health, making mental health more accessible and more personalized for folks. So excited to chat more about kind of the current state of ops and how we've all survived this last year, and what's coming up next.
I love it. Again, the OG being episode number 1. Love having you back. So, Keith Jones, longtime good friend of mine, but I'm not going to steal any of your thunder. I'm going to let you introduce yourself as well.
Oh, appreciate that, Brad, and I'm super excited to be here. To Maz's point, caliber of guests in this series has just gone up and up, and quite frankly, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I've been in the ops world on and off over the last 10 plus years. I actually got my start in operations when I didn't even know I was doing sales ops. I was hired because I was pretty good at Excel, and I was actually doing forecasting and things like that. But today, I have the awesome privilege of leading systems strategy for MURAL, a visual collaboration software where I've got a small agile team, and we're just trying to build up the best tech stack that we have.
Small team for now. Keith and I were checking in earlier this week, and I know he's got some headcount that he's about to start posting for. So if you want to go work with a badass 2 headcount, sign up to go hang out with Keith over at MURAL. But awesome having you on as always, man. And last but certainly not least, Ollie, excited to have you on as well. I'll let you kind of introduce yourself, and then maybe we'll jump right into the content.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So I work for a company called PEX. We work at the intersection of copyright, media, creators, and platforms, and we essentially provide an infrastructure layer that helps these parties transact. I've worked at the intersection of media and technology for a few years at this point, and found myself learning about RevOps in the last year or two. I was in grad school when I first heard about RevOps at the time. And so I decided to start doing some research in academia while I was in school. And that's actually how I met Brad. So I spent a lot of time researching what is RevOps, trying to find a definition. Why is it important? How did it become relevant? How do you do RevOps, quote unquote, if there's like one way to do it? And also, what are the pitfalls for companies? What are the challenges that they're going to see when trying to implement RevOps? So I guess that's how I met Brad, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Ollie. And I'll brag for him if he doesn't want to brag on himself. Actually ended up writing his thesis on RevOps for his master's program, which is so cool. And I think when we look at this now in sort of retrospect of last year and even over the last couple of years of how RevOps has developed and grown and built, and really, I think the more exciting part is where it's going. I think that's what we're really going to dive into in a second. But I think it's so cool that we now have, like you said, Ollie, academia with an understanding of what this is, why is it important. If there's anything that tells me that it's not going anywhere and it's only going to grow from here, which is super exciting. So as always, love having everybody on. We got a big group of folks on. So let's keep this interactive. Please drop questions into the chat. The first thing that we're going to do right now actually is drop an answer or drop a question over to you guys. We'd love to hear from you. What do you think will be the most significant change in RevOps next year? There's no multiple choice here. Sorry, Frank, don't let me get in your way. There's no right or wrong answer here, but by all means, we'd love to hear from you. Where do you think RevOps is going? So we just posted that in the questions, so feel free to pop that in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. We'll start taking some questions from it too, but this is actually where we're going to start the whole conversation. What are the most significant changes you've seen in RevOps over the last year, and what do they mean for your organization? So we want to know what's big and significant, but how are they impacting our organizations? Keith, I'm going to start with you. I know you and I have had this conversation a lot, but we'll kick it over to you to tell us how it's changed you over the last year.
Yeah, right on. So, I think where it starts right now, or how I would frame this is, the ante's been raised, right? Like we are now having to operate at a really high standard in order to produce stable and predictable things to the organization, right? There's a lot of virtue perhaps in that notion of kind of move fast, break things mentality, right? But I feel like now RevOps is the last group that can break things along the way. We need to be the ones providing stability, and where that's kind of taken real shape for me is coaching my team to start adopting some of the tried and true methodologies of our friends, colleagues, and peers in product and engineering disciplines, right? In testing things thoroughly and adopting all of those particular workflows and things of that nature, so that when we ship something, when we push something out to our growing sales teams, our CS teams, we make sure that it actually works and it delivers the result that we need, and that we've documented it and done all these things to ensure a smooth delivery and ultimately the result that we're looking for. But it comes with that discipline and that rigor, not necessarily process for the sake of process, but we've just got to deliver something solid, and continue to build on our reputation in that sense.
Absolutely. I know we had Errol Toker on a long time ago, or a couple of months ago, actually, on an episode, spoke about the same thing, about some of these principles we take from product management and how we see successful engineering get deployed. Like, we have a responsibility now to adopt those same things. So I couldn't agree with you more. Manas, I know you've had an interesting way of thinking about this too over the last year, especially changing jobs and everything. So I'll kick it over to you too. What changes have you seen and how have they impacted you?
Yeah. Well, what's cool is, like, a few years ago, a RevOps webinar was such a foreign concept, right? Like, and so the fact that we're even on a call talking about it is a testament to its growth and its importance. The area that I wanted to talk about, which is probably the elephant in the room, is just how did COVID impact so many things for RevOps, right? I forget who said it, but there's some quote about, like, necessity breeds innovation. And there were so many businesses who I think made understandable excuses for, hey, we can't transform this fast, we can't really switch to this X, Y, and Z because it's going to take time and effort. And then all of a sudden we're all home and now we have to, right? And so there's no excuse anymore. And I think for RevOps, I'm sure a lot of the people on this call can relate to having to reconsider what performance metrics do we look at to see how the organization's doing. Managers aren't on the phones, or they're not on the floor all the time watching their reps make cold calls, right? So, or whatever it is in person for that matter. So how do we provide more visibility there? Collaboration across our tech stack, which I'm sure Keith especially has had to think a lot about, changes a lot when your entire sales force is at home, right? I think things like security and being on public Wi-Fi networks in a coffee shop instead of on a secure private network at home, or in the office rather, right? So a lot of different, like, how do we make sure that the wheel keeps moving ideally at the same pace, even better, faster, in a completely different environment? What are the implications for, like, systems, tools, process, training, and enablement? We could spend an entire hour, I'm sure, talking about just that alone. I think what's been really inspiring is to see how so much of that change had to be driven by RevOps and how different RevOps teams have adapted. So I'm glad that I think we can say that we're in a better place, both from a, like, health perspective and even operationally, than we were back in March and April of 2020. But I still love to hear how RevOps teams really adapted over that time. That's been a really incredible transition to see.
Yeah, I completely agree. The one trend that I was a little bit afraid of, and I'm glad it didn't turn out this way, for over the years, especially the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen so much growth, and we hear it all the time, 400% year-over-year growth of revenue operations titles on LinkedIn. Part of me going through a pandemic, and a lot of companies had layoffs, and you had to be reconsidering what your headcount was. That trend didn't stop, and if anything, it only went up. And so you look at it almost as a blessing in disguise of how COVID has actually had to turn and look at RevOps and say, no, you guys actually help keep that wheel spinning fast, and our company can't operate without you. So it wasn't nearly as impacted as some other departments were. So I agree with you. Ollie, love to hear your take too of just how the last year has impacted you guys and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, on the point you just made around, like, almost RevOps benefiting from the environment, one of the things that I found through my research is, as teams drift apart and they are remote, it becomes harder to have that collaboration. And RevOps is kind of born out of the need to promote that cross-functional alignment. And so I would say that macro trend has definitely benefited the function of RevOps. I mean, I work in a remote company myself, and so I definitely see the need of those integrator roles that help cross-functionally. I would almost say you're going to start seeing that across other teams, like between product and revenue as well. Like, how can we fill those gaps where you need people to speak the common language, share data and information? So yeah, in that respect, RevOps has definitely been benefited. I think one also important thing that's been happening for the last few years and definitely doesn't show any sign of stopping is the proliferation of tools that you see available in the RevOps toolkit. There's probably around 8,000 more marketing ops tools available out there in the market, which is just mind-boggling. This year in 2021, we passed 1,000 sales tax tools for the first time. Nobody's counting customer success, but I'm sure they're going to start doing that soon. And again, looking at research, I noticed that as the complexity of information systems increases, collaboration across teams goes down. And so it really highlights how important it is that you have a RevOps figure helping out all of your teams collaborate. And so,
yeah, I completely agree. It's funny because, yeah, the increased amount of tech that's out there, we see it every day, both, and we talk about it in WizOps, obviously we talk about it all day with our customers and what we do, but the proliferation and just the expansion of all of that landscape is crazy. The common denominator is RevOps owns it in some form or fashion. I think that's so cool that while that growth is happening, it's obviously pouring more fuel on the fire for the need for someone to manage that tech stack. So last but certainly not least on this question, Taft, I'll pass it over to you too. I know you've had an interesting viewpoint of it in both seats that you sit in. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I everything these guys have said, I agree with completely. It's an important function. It's a function more companies are coming to understand that they rely on. It's born out of necessity because of the proliferation of tools. As Ollie said, all these things are true. So I want to point to something that's a little more surface level, but still really important. I think until recently, I've thought of RevOps as similarly to the way I think of the term AI. It's like, it's a bullshit term. It means whatever the person saying it is trying to say. Like, AI is meaningless today. And RevOps until recently felt pretty meaningless to me. And I think there was this sort of race between RevOps and like BizOps meant, which is like sort of a larger term, but like, was BizOps going to be the term that RevOps sort of became part of? Or is it go-to-market ops? Or is it, all of these other terms, sales and marketing ops? And I think we've, Griffin, yeah, should be go-to-market ops. As we, I think we're all starting to agree on a name, and it feels like a surface level simple thing, but the fact that we're all sort of coalescing around this term and agreeing that it is RevOps, and we have sort of a shared definition. And I saw somebody in the chat mention that it also includes enablement, which I think is true for most companies when they say RevOps. But the fact that we all sort of agree on this definition and the term to represent what we do is a really big thing that's happened in the last year that wasn't true 2, 3, 4 years ago.
I completely agree. I think what's crazy, I remember the first time I was presented with RevOps, and I think I told this to Monas. I don't know if I told this to the rest of you guys or not before, but I was sales ops manager at Gather 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. Seems like 100 years ago. And I remember Nick Miller, my CEO, coming to me and saying, hey, you've only been here for 3 months, and we're not all about changing titles this quickly in a job, but you're not doing sales ops. Like, you're spending more of your time in marketing and customer success and sales. It's like, I've heard this new term in the world now. It's called revenue operation. We're going to just right size that title to you. You don't get any more money or anything. Don't worry about that. But your new title is revenue operation. That's how I got it. And it was so true. But that was, again, 5 or so years ago. And at that point, he had heard it at a conference. Somebody just taught word of mouth stuff. And now, again, like you said, we've got webinars about it. We've got more titles on LinkedIn than we know what to do with. And so I think it is still in the eye of the beholder. I think we still have a lot of interpretation of how we interpret AI is the same way we can interpret RevOps. But it's here to stay. I think the common denominator there is that it's not going anywhere, and you're seeing the adoption of it more and more. So absolutely love it. Which brings us in, honestly, to that next question. And I appreciate everybody jumping in here and telling us what their thoughts are on where it's going. Same question I'm going to ask everyone here. Taft, we'll kick it off to you. Where do you think it's heading in the next year, and how should we plan ahead for that?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And when we were sort of prepping for this and talking about it the other day, the first thing that popped into my head was something that made an impact on me. You mentioned Errol Toker, the CEO of Truly, that you had spoken to him before and he had been a guest. And I follow him really closely. He's one of those people who seems to just have an interesting view of everything that's happening around us. And I tend to agree with him. Anytime he writes something, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I should have thought of that, but I never do before him. And he said at one point to me that like every app out there is competing to be your source of truth, which is 100% true. Everybody wants to be your source of truth. Everybody wants you to live in their reporting. Everybody wants to own your data. And something I think we're starting to see, that's not going to change. That's going to keep going on forever. Everybody wants to be your source of truth. I think Sonar is unique in that, like, that you're one of the companies for whom that's not necessarily true, and that's awesome. But I think what we're starting to see is some companies, some of these, tons and tons of tools, we're starting to see this race, this consolidation start to happen, and we're starting to see some winners. An example here is ZoomInfo, that's traditionally been a data company. Now they're building and have released a competitor to Outreach, and suddenly you have a single app where you have both the outreach and the data behind it living in the same place. And you see, the fact that Salesforce bought one of the biggest BI tools in the world. They're doubling down on their goal to be your source of truth. And I think we're going to see this consolidation continue. And I think it's not going to come to a head next year or in the next 5 years, but I think the next year we're going to see that speed up pretty significantly. And hand in hand with that is I think more and more companies are going to take control of their data in ways that they haven't before. I think more companies are becoming aware of the importance of owning your own data and controlling and manipulating and normalizing your own data in a data warehouse that you own. And I think the biggest companies in the world were buying MuleSoft and BI tools and stuff years ago, but I think we're going to see smaller and smaller companies taking advantage of this, and more players out there building like prefab data warehousing BI tools that teams are gonna lean on. And yes, I was talking about Tableau there for the
Tableau.
Not sure. Right.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. Like again, we talk about the proliferation of all the tech that we're going into, but you're also seeing this, people keep saying the word, not me, the great consolidation. And you're seeing a lot of the acquisitions roll up, and you're looking at ZoomInfo with Chorus coming in recently, like they continue to do things like that too. So we're going to see both of those trends on both ends of the spectrum, I think. So Ollie, I bet I'd love to hear on your side too, where we're going, especially based on some of the research that you've done.
Yeah, as I said in the prep here, I wasn't too sure of, it's hard to have a crystal ball, but I think what Taft mentioned kind of serves up what I wanted to say, because when you look at industries maturing, you always have some sort of consolidation at some point. And if we look at the general technology hype cycle, I think by Gartner, there's at some point this hype and then a shroud of disillusionment, I think, which we obviously all hope is not going to happen anytime soon. But I think one thing that we can do as RevOps professionals to mitigate that is ensuring that we vet opportunities out when we are hired as much as possible. Because obviously, as you said, there's so many LinkedIn opportunities out there. Everybody's looking to hire a new RevOps function. And it's really important that the people who are hiring fully understand the scope and what it takes for RevOps to be successful. I think in talking with executives, one thing that I found is often you don't have the right organizational structure that's ready to house RevOps. And so if you say, I'm going to use RevOps as this shiny new tool is going to fix everything, and then you have the 3 customer success, marketing, and sales teams operating in 3 completely different departments, your RevOps person is not going to be empowered to sort of succeed and deliver on the promise of revenue operations. And so getting those expectations right and really making sure that they understand why RevOps is something that they need is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think the thing that we realize is people realize they need it, but sometimes they even have trouble answering and articulating why we need it. Like, guys, we just know we need it. Like, we know we have to do this, but articulating the actual why of that is tougher than I think it seems. Modest, I know you've looked at this obviously for a long time in your role, but when you look at it moving forward, how do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah, it's hard to follow a guy who's writing his whole thesis on the future of RevOps, but I'll do my best. I think yeah, there's two things that have been on my mind. One is the how standardization gets us from good to great, and the other one is leading by example. So on the standardization getting us from good to great, Taft already said it, right? We're agreeing or have agreed on what to call the thing, and I think that opens a lot of doors to us saying, all right, well, if that's what we're calling it, what does that actually mean? Not just what falls under the umbrella, but like, what does really great RevOps look like, right? So I think the RevOps is getting a lot of attention right now. I think attention then breeds a lot of discussion and discovery. Discovery then breeds the tried and true and trial and error and all that good stuff. And then you end up with best practices and what great looks like, right? So if we think about that as I think such an ops nerd now, but if we think about that as kind of like a funnel or a process, right? We're slowly, I think, moving from the top to the middle, and then on the way to getting to great RevOps. And so I think great RevOps means now that we've agreed on what to call it, we're getting to a place where we're all now sharing this works for my organization. So what does great onboarding for RevOps look like? Folks like Keith are thinking about, what does a great tech stack look like? And I think with a lot of the consolidation happening even in the tech stack world, we sort of get more progress there. What does great measurement reporting look like? What is tracking North Star metrics and not just vanity metrics? What does that really look like? And so I can go on, right? But I think now that we've agreed on what to call it, we start collecting a lot and understanding a lot about what great looks like. So I'm excited about getting from good to great now that standardization has made a lot of progress. And then the second one is leading by example. So I think our co-founder here talks a lot about centers of excellence. And I think, Ollie, you called this out, right? RevOps was born out of a necessity for more alignment. And I think in that way, sort of has to be a center of excellence, right? Of data, of process, of strategy. Cliff mentioned, I think earlier in the notes that because of this, RevOps is getting more of a decision-making seat at the table. And I think being a steward of great data management and great documentation and training and great user empathy in designing solutions is, I think, something that rolls and can roll really well out of RevOps. And then one last one, and I'm rambling, but I think this one's really important and was such a pleasant surprise for me, was that both RevOps teams that I've been a part of are arguably the most diverse teams at the company by race and gender, yeah, but also I find that so many people I talk to in operations have come from such crazily interesting backgrounds. I mean, Taft, you already called this out at the beginning of the call. I've worked with people who were former teachers, firefighters. My favorite was a door-to-door salesman for the Mormon church. I mean, there's so many interesting backgrounds, and I think that's because operations is so many things, and so operations can pull from so many valuable backgrounds. And I think by virtue of the different backgrounds and perspectives, you also get people who look different and sound different and think different. So leading by example in terms of being an example of diversity and how that can be so powerful is something that I think we've already seen, but we'll continue to. And so really, really excited about that.
Absolutely. The diversity side of it is what is, I think, breeding so much of the creativity that comes into it. And we're seeing, even in our own community, we see it in WizOps all the time, people coming up with so many new, unique ways of solving problems. You only come up with that new, unique flavor of that when you come from a different background, you think about it differently. So I love it. Keith, fire away. I know I know you and I have talked about this plenty of times, but I'm pumped to hear your thought on it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea just in and of itself, because I feel like so often in RevOps, at least to date, we've all had to, more often than not, be a little bit more reactionary than we'd like to be, right? Instead of being proactive in some of the things that we want to bring to the organization. Like it's been said here a couple of times, right? RevOps being born out of a necessity for that alignment and things like that. And that's by its very nature, a very reactionary status to be in. But, thinking very tactically, right? And Monis actually hit on this a couple of times, talking about, centers of excellence and data and being kind of the stewards of that, right? I feel like if we have an opportunity in the next year and the years after that to shift a little bit to more proactive behaviors, is that we need to be thinking with a little bit more of a product mindset, right? We need to be quote unquote productizing the data that the processes and the systems and everything else that we own as a discipline is producing on behalf of the organizations that we work for and work with. So that means, getting really tactical with it, right? We need to make sure that when we send out a dashboard to a sales team, to a CS team, to account managers, to BDRs, that like, hey, here's your dashboard, but also here's what you're supposed to do with it. Here's the documentation. Here's the walkthrough. And by the way, here's the exact call to action and what we expect to see if you're using this insights correctly, right? That's what it's got to look like. We got to build these things the same way that the software companies that many of us work for are building the platforms that we're bringing to market, right? You expect the user to do something, you expect to see them get something out of it, right? What's the value that it's bringing? And I feel like we need to have that 360 mindset when it comes to it. It's not just a pretty looking dashboard. It's a dashboard that's meant to do something, and it's got to be self-sufficient too, right? It's got to be something that we can equip our stakeholders with and watch them go run with it and make the informed data-driven decisions that we expect them to make.
You're spot on. It is not just about building anymore. It's about building, then deploying, then educating, then enabling, and then tracking that adoption to make sure what you spend all that time building up front is actually working for the business. So you're spot on. I know we're about a minute or so over. We're going to wrap up relatively quickly. We did have one question, and Taft, I think this is going to be perfect for you to answer. You have a pretty good insight on it, so I'll let you answer it quickly, and then we're going to do one more quick little round table, and then we'll let everybody get back to the fun part of their day job. But one person came in, it's like, why do some companies hire internally for RevOps while some prefer agencies to handle their RevOps? I'll minimize the question there, but I want your quick thought on that, because I know it's extremely relevant to what you're doing with Iceberg.
Yeah. Iceberg is one of those external partners that people bring in. So I think there are a million reasons companies bring in external or decide to hire internal, and we could spend a month talking about this. But when it comes to external, there are two situations where I think it makes sense to bring somebody in. The first is when you have a narrowly defined specific project on which you need to move quickly, or you're missing some critical path skill set. And so I think that's when you go find a partner who has done this 10 times before, instead of stumbling through it yourself, and often ending up bringing in a partner to clean up your mess. So that's one time when I think it makes sense. And the other, and this is the one where sort of Iceberg lives, so this is the one I know intimately, is when you're small and you're ready to scale and you don't have the resources, or you're financially not ready to hire a qualified revenue operations team. What most companies do here is they hire an admin and say, this admin is ops, and you have effectively hired a plumber to build your whole house. And there's a little part of that house that's going to work really well, and the rest of it's going to not work particularly well. And it's not that person's fault. You've actually put them in a bad position by making them the ops person, and Dunning-Kruger at its finest there. And so the other time when you should bring people in is when you want a qualified team that can, in our case, for the cost of an admin, be your ops team, because most small scaling companies don't need 40 hours a week of 5 people's time to get this stuff done. They just need an expert who's done it 10 times before to tell them the right path and get there quickly. So that's how you should think about internal versus external, in my opinion.
I love it. I know, talking with Keith and Monis, I think Ollie as well. I know even in all of our different capacities, we've worked with that. And I think every scenario is different, but I know there's times, Keith works with consultants as well right now. It's like get certain things done under certain scopes, get in, get out, or have them on bench or have them on staff to jump in when needed. So I think it always does come down to the company, but there's a million use cases out for it. So like I said, I know we'll get everybody back to their day shortly. So we'll wrap up with this one last question, and I'll add sort of two flavors to it. Obviously, when we were prepping for this, we want to make sure everybody gets to leave with something. So we're going to ask everybody on this panel, what ways do you stay on top of the latest RevOps trends? But as always, I'm going to couple that up with a part two of that question. So you'll get to answer a second one of, for the folks that have been on before, but Keith and Monis, y'all know this. What advice, if you were to fire up the DeLorean, run back in time at the beginning of your ops career, what advice would you give yourself, and therefore a lot of the folks that are on this call, advice for how to grow? Obviously, all four of you have done a phenomenal job of growing in your ops career. You wouldn't be where you are, if you didn't take the right steps. But we'd love to know your advice for the folks that are listening on how to really grow. So, how to stay on top of the latest RevOps trends, and what advice would you give them to grow as a RevOps leader? Monis, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat first and let you start us off.
Yeah, sure thing. Some of the bribery always works. Some of the best advice that I got in my career was look for inspiration in both ways. So like look inside and outside. And so I think inside within the sort of world of RevOps, I mean, I said it before, but like I'm on a panel of people who I have already been following, before this webinar, reading their sort of like thoughts and perspectives. The Wizards of Operations community has probably been the single greatest community to like further my learning, and that's only one of several other communities that I can call out, kind of in that tier. RevOps Co-op, Salesforce Ohana, so on and so forth. There are great podcasts. I mean, I think those are the things that are like easier to Google, and so all I would say is like start looking, right? And so the more interesting one for me was like, where do you look externally? So what are best practices from other teams within your own company or other companies, be it finance, IT? Keith already talked about, ingesting some of like what product and engineering have really, championed. I've learned a lot from our finance team. I've learned a lot from our marketing team. But even from like other business models, how do other business models and other teams solve problems? Ultimately, I think still become equally valuable for RevOps, because if it really is about process efficiency, insights, then so many other functions are doing that, right? And so I would say like keep your eyes and ears like on the ground in the world, but also very much like outside of the fishbowl.
Love that. It's so good. You're right. The internal and external perspective of it all, you have to keep that grounded in your approach of it. And I love it. Keith, what do you think? How we stay on top of trends, and what advice are you dropping on people?
Yeah. So as far as staying on top of trends, it comes down to, I think, just always asking questions. It's been said far too many times, but probably still not enough. But the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. That's quite literally what it is. It doesn't matter if it's going to validate what you already are thinking about doing or thinking about trying, or maybe it's even going to invalidate it, right? Maybe you're a little bit far along in an idea, and then you're going to ask the question in WizOps or another community, or even just out there on LinkedIn, and someone's going to give you something to think about, right? So I highly encourage everyone to always just kind of question everything, right? And just have that as a general mentality. I think that's the best way to stay on top of trends, because it'll help you expose to what your peers are doing in this space, right? And might even give you better ideas on how to do things differently in your day-to-day. But my biggest piece of advice, and this is probably the single most important lesson I've learned in my career, and something I wish I had learned a lot earlier, but learn how to say no, and learn how to say no with grace. I actually did a talk on this with our friend Jeff Ignacio several months ago, but we can't say yes to everything. And the reality is there's so much demand from RevOps to do so much. We have to learn how to say no. Unfortunately, we have to kind of be the bad guy from time to time, right? But there's a way to do it. There's an art and a grace to it that can really help soften the blow. And so learning how to solidify your position when you have to ultimately disappoint the stakeholder and say either no, we can't do that right now, and I don't exactly know when we can get to it, or ultimately we can't do that at all, and here's the reason for it. but it's an art form in and of itself. And quite frankly, it only comes with practice. So you have to start doing it sooner rather than later.
Yep. Oh, I love that. You're right. And Taft just dropped it in. There's an article about it of how to say no gracefully. So you're spot on. It is the hardest thing to do in RevOps because I think naturally, like we are in our DNA, we want to say yes because we know how to build solutions. We know how to solve problems for folks. But if we say yes to everything, we're not going to get anything done. And you have to be able to say it no gracefully, but say no. And here's why. So you're spot on. Taft, I'll pass it over to you, and then Ollie, you can bring us home.
Yeah, I'll make this one quick. Keith, yeah, that thing I dropped is it's less me, more my partner. She's a psychiatrist and like wildly smart person who actually wrote a lot of that article on how to say no gracefully because I lack grace in a lot of situations and she does not. So anyway, I'm gonna again take sort of a different tack here because these guys have said so much smart stuff that I actually want to talk about how hard it is to stay up on RevOps right now. So it wasn't long ago when I first started in sales, like every sales book was a Zig Ziglar how to close a deal. And it was like bottom of funnel, closing tactics, awful books that ignored the rest of the funnel. And operations is sort of where sales was 5 or 10 years ago with there was no canon for anything other than a few narrow parts of operations. And so I think we're still waiting on our Jeb Blunt for RevOps. I think we're waiting on somebody to start writing canon that speaks to something other than like product operations and other corners of operations that aren't quite the same as what we do. And then for staying up on it, I think the smartest thing to do is look for things like shOPS Talk, join WizOps, join some of these communities, and be mindful of the fact that anybody who gives you tactical, really interesting stories about things they've built are not the people you need to be listening to. You need to be listening to the people who help give you a framework for how to think about operations. That's where you get the good advice, and that's what I'll leave you with.
I love that. Yeah, there's plenty of outlets like we've all talked about with WizOps, with Pavilion, with RevOps Co-op, all these great communities that you can jump into and find other thought leaders to provide that. I think it's, I agree with you. I think it's very enlightening when you get a genuine framework. Like, here's how I think you should think about this. I'm not going to go build a validation rule for you. I'm not going to build that flow, but here's how you should actually think about solving that problem for yourself. You'll get a little bit more out of that. It's kind of teaching someone to fish instead of just giving them the fish sometimes. So I completely agree. Ollie, I'll let you bring us home on how to keep up with the trends. You've done a lot of research on it, but also what you think about in your career as far as an ops perspective.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off what Taft just said, it's so complicated to stay up with trends because you have so many companies who are also trying to sell their solutions, and they provide frameworks and they provide sometimes more tactical solutions. I think something that's really useful is to think about the fundamentals that drive really the practice of operations, and kind of piggybacking on what Mana said earlier. RevOps borrows from so many different disciplines, and it's really an effort to operationalize revenue team activities. And this has been going on with product for decades, development in the digital space as well with DevOps, industrial engineering. It's not something that's necessarily new and shiny. It's just we're applying those fundamentals and concepts of systems thinking to this revenue reality. And so if you can understand those fundamentals, theories of constraints, really understanding which point in your system you need to be leveraging in order to increase the throughput of the entire system, that's where you can make real breakthroughs and make sure that the work that you're doing matters. And in terms of advice for my younger self, I think one thing that I struggled with always is that in an ops role, I was often the only person of the company doing my job. And so I didn't necessarily have a senior leader who was doing my same thing, who could teach me. And so, as others have said here, going out of your way to leverage resources online and find those mentors and find those solutions and frameworks by people who have been in this space, asking questions, being humble outside sometimes of your job is something that would have helped me because that's not necessarily something that I was doing early on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think finding that right level of mentorship, that right outlet, I think everybody almost collectively agrees with that as far as finding the right folks and communities, finding the right people to follow. But I'll say it best, Keith, I'll agree with you probably the most. The worst question that you ask is when you don't, or however you phrased it. And so ask questions, be curious. Nobody's going to make fun of you for it. But the more you open yourself up to learn about that sort of thing, the better we're all going to be about it. And so, again, I think that's one of the coolest things that we look at now as we reflect on the last year of doing this, but also just the last year of how our community has grown. You know, looking at the folks on this call and coming from the backgrounds that we've all had. I mean, we've got a school teacher, we've got somebody who literally wrote a thesis about RevOps. So one of the biggest cycling guys I know, and then also a police officer. And so you put a bunch of these backgrounds. I think that's why we're getting so much good creativity in the RevOps world, is because, again, we've all walked from different paths, but we're here solving the same problems now. So that being said, I know we're 16 minutes well over time for the folks that hung out, and hopefully we didn't keep you from any other calls that you have. If we did, send them our apologies, but we appreciate everybody hanging on for a little while longer. As always, Taft, Ollie, Keith, Modest, can't thank you guys enough for jumping on, sharing all of your insights for us. This is why this community is so great, because of folks like you. So can't thank you all enough for being here, and appreciate the time. For everybody that's still hanging on and dropping on. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode, another lap around the sun. We'll do it again. And thanks for joining, and talk to you all soon in WizOps and in real life pretty soon as well. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you all soon. Take care. See you guys.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
See you guys.
See you guys.